Hello, and welcome back to the Share Series Monday Management Update. I'm Dan Aldridge, founder and managing partner of the Share Series. And with me today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Chris Jones, CFO of Odyssey Marine. We've actually had Chris on before, so it'll be a fascinating conversation to get an update. But before we get in, just wanted to remind the audience about the question button on the top right of the video player. Use that to submit inquiries during the session, and we'll get those answered as we have time. So with that, Chris, welcome back. And
Thank you for having us.
A lot of progress at Odyssey since we last spoke. So why don't we just jump straight in, and let's start with just a basic overview, because you got a lot of folks probably on the call who may not have listened to last call.
All right, you got it. So Odyssey Marine started way back as a deep water wreck exploration company. And over the last 7 or 8 years has really transferred away from that business to a marine mineral exploration company there as well. And so by courtesy of that, and really what the whole premise of the business very on was to take oil and gas industry like ROV, AUV, and other scanning technology and really adapt it for the seabed exploration effort. So they did that once for the wreck exploration, and now they've done that for the mineral exploration. And as you can see on the slide, they've got some pretty substantial accolades about amount of seabed map, time spent below 6,000 meters and such. In fact, over 50% of most of sort of sea wrecks actually discovered on the ocean's floor have actually been discovered by people at Odyssey. Next slide. Now the key is that as we transition from that from the wreck exploration into minerals, we really have taken a deep focus on some of the critical elements that are out there today, both the rising green energy crisis as well as the food crisis. Next slide. So really, initially, the company started and cut its teeth, focused really on what we've been seeing and challenges that we've seen in sort of the battery metals place. Currently, the company has exploration efforts in both in the Cook Islands and elsewhere, really focused on something called polymetallic nodules. And these nodules are hugely important in terms of being able to provide the elements like cobalt, nickel, manganese, and other elements that are important for the development of electric cars. Next slide. Additionally, actually, its first foray into deep water mineral exploration started with phosphates, both down in New Zealand as well as in Mexico. And really, phosphates are a growing challenge. As you start to see food prices growing all around the world, a large portion for that is because of the high increasing costs in fertilizer. Now, of course, with the conflict in Russia and as well as the closing of the border in China, two of the largest exporters of phosphates, we've seen rock phosphate prices reach record high, and they continue to be record high prices. Next slide. So as a result, we continue to think that there's a huge opportunity to be able to search the seabed floor to really find and answer a lot of these challenging questions going forward.
So we're going to get into the operations, some of the projects that you guys have ongoing. But one of the things I did want to touch on before we got into that was some of the progress you've made, right, specifically on the balance sheet and how you've changed your capital structure, because I know that was a big concern. So if you want to spend a little bit of time on that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. The last 2 years have been transformational for Odyssey Marine. So essentially, about a year and a half, a year ago, we did a capital raise where we essentially took back to remove some of the legacy shipwreck debt that was on the balance sheet. We actually removed all of it. And then here in the last 2 or 3 months, we actually had a substantial overhang with one of our former partners down in Mexico, a company called OMEX, which included a both convertible note as well as a shareholder purchase agreement. That really made it very difficult for investors, particularly institutional investors, to invest in Odyssey. We were able to retire that and cancel those notes as well as that SPA for about a 70% discount. So at this point, our capital and balance sheet is exceptionally clean. We have one outstanding note, roughly about $13.5 million note. That's 18 months and ticking away at 10% on a PIK basis. But other than that, we are fairly clean balance sheet.
Great. So let's completely shift gears and go into operations. If you'll pull up the next slide, we're really going to talk about the mineral extraction process, and really what's driving growth. And so, Chris, you can start with a couple of projects, and then we'll get into the Cook Islands project in a little bit more detail.
Absolutely. So, really, the biggest opportunity is the Cook Islands. We recently had the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands in Washington, D.C., which is really a huge opportunity for us. Secondly, we have the EXO project down in Baja, Mexico. We've been down in Mexico for a number of years. We are currently involved in an ongoing litigation with the Mexican government that we are hopeful for a favorable resolution there. If not, we do expect to have a positive NAFTA settlement. but this would be one of the most important phosphate deposits in the world, and it would forever change the America's phosphate situation from a supply-demand perspective. And then we continue to be able to draw on our expertise in the phosphate business, more specifically down in Brazil, where we do have a very similar, geological setting that we found in Mexico, but off the coast of Brazil. Now, what's exciting about Brazil is that they're hugely in need of phosphate, even more so than North America. 70% of Brazil's phosphate comes from Russia. So at this point, they're looking pretty desperately to be able to find an alternative solution.
Next slide. And so we'll go into a little bit more detail on the Cook Islands and the relationship that you guys have there.
So we actually been in the Cook Islands for almost a decade at this point. The Cook Islands are one of the primary EEZ. There are other deep water mineral exploration projects out there but are required or reliant on the United Nations. Here we have the social license for the Cook people of the Cook Islands, really focused on these polymetallic nodules. And I said earlier, if you could go to the next slide. This would represent our area that we're currently the orange area, represents about 211,000 square kilometers of explorable area. On an NPV basis, the nodules represent about $7.4 billion. And you'll see some of the criteria that we use in there as well. So a hugely valuable asset in the current market that we are in today as well. Now, the area that you have all outlined there represents the Cook Islands EEZ. Really, what we only need is one country to be able to provide us access to that. So if you look at companies like the Metals Company, where they're currently waiting for the ISA to get approval, we do not have that problem. All we need to do is wait for the Cook Islands government to provide that approval. And importantly, they are continuing to be very supportive of this effort. Next slide. And ultimately, why are these nodules so important? So this is an actual image of a nodule. And it does demonstrate to you all the resources that are in this. What's unique about this nodule is that it's 100% usable from a prospect perspective. Obviously, it has super important elements like cobalt and rare earths, nickel and copper. The actual items that bind it together can actually be used for manufacturing cement there as well. So it's a huge, almost 100% utilized, which is very much in contrast to what you'll see in other elements or other sort of tellable mining, where you have substantial amounts of strip mining and huge overburden that you need to remove. Next slide. And this is important. This is really just a demonstration of some sort of table stakes from the mining industry. So the Cook Islands recently published their JORC report, which is essentially a standard code for mining. So if anyone who's done any experience in the metals and mining industry will immediately recognize this. For this point, they have an indicated resource of about 26 million tons and an inferred of about 14. So at this point, they do continue to be able to develop this asset. And we, of course, are looking to move from an inferred to a measured resource here over the next 12 months there as well. But this is hugely important that we are able to validate this on a standardized process as well.
So we talked a little bit about the detail of the Cook Islands project. Let's kind of take a step back, and look overall. What does this mean, right, to kind of market share? Who owns the cobalt market? Other rare earth minerals today, and then how does this play into the strategic importance and how the U.S. government can help play a role in this?
So today, that element is completely controlled by the Chinese by the Chinese industry, right? They've been developing the cobalt market. The vast majority of cobalt actually comes from the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Of course, there are some concerns about where that source of that cobalt comes from. Of course, children, what they call artisanal mines, and ultimately with underage and children miners being able to strip away the cobalt. The challenge with cobalt is it typically is a companion metal. That is that it, for up until about 10 or 20 years ago, copper miners would actually burn it off and wouldn't actually extract it. Once they realized that it was important for cathodes for, lithium-ion batteries, they started to retain that. So it's a difficult metal to find. And so really today you have, the Chinese processors and Chinese mining companies really dominating the industry, making it strategic. Now, that dynamic is even more apparent where it comes to rare earths. Certain magnets and such we are not able to manufacture without the participation of some of the exports that come from China.
And so thinking about sizing the market, like a project like the Cook Islands or the phosphate in Brazil, can you give us kind of a ballpark on what does that represent? Is that like 1% of the market? Is this going to be, a game changer on market share? Any just thoughts there would be great.
for Cook Islands, if we were to be able to take the entire resource of the Cook Islands, it is a generational asset. That is that if we were to shut down all cobalt mining around the world, you would be able to supply the world with cobalt for a generation, just from the resource that comes from the Cook Islands. Now, I don't think that that's reasonable that would ever happen, but I think the key is that there is a reason to believe that this is 20, 30, 40, 50% of the world's supply. And it really just comes down to what the willingness is and how easy it is to get to other terrestrial resources. Similarly, with the phosphate, our phosphate projects off the coast of Mexico and Brazil, there's a lot of phosphate out there. The problem is that it's very difficult to come by, and people don't want the environmental impact of terrestrial phosphate.
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue, right, to the next question. And it's some of the negative perceptions, right, that the mining industry has in general. And so can you talk a little bit about how Odyssey's process is different, right, and a little bit about kind of the social license, right, that you create with the local environments in which you operate?
Absolutely. So I think, going to the social license issue, I think the mining industry has faced a lot of challenges, particularly in certainly Canada and the United States, or even Australia, where indigenous people have been essentially have been adversely impacted over a generation or over multiple generations to be able to access these resources. I think there's been a bigger focus on social license than there ever has been before. Of course, terrestrial mining also is having pretty, dire impact on the environment there as well, whether it be rainforest or otherwise. It's just become very damaging. So there's that, as well as the amount of effort that it takes to be able to, transport and process a lot of the overburden. It's hugely environmentally damaging in terms of the energy that is required. Our process is such that you certainly do not have the level of overburden and extraction that you would need to do in the terrestrial mining business. So from an energy perspective alone, it's substantially lower in terms of the amount of energy that you need to be able to process that. And then here again, in terms of over social license, particularly in the Cook Islands, we do have the full support of the people of the Cook Islands and all 16,000 residents on those islands. And of course, I think that would ultimately be hugely important for their, beneficial in their social welfare going on, bringing a significant amount of sort of liquidity to that market. Very similar to what Norway has done with, with their investment fund. We would ultimately see the same thing happen in the Cook Islands.
Yeah, so go forward one slide. And so I actually just talked a little bit about this, but this kind of validates some of what you just said, right? The work that's being done, not only just with Cook Islands, but with the U.S. government as well.
Absolutely. So the gentleman in the middle with Leia around him, that is the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, has really spent a lot of time and effort really getting both. He wants to make sure that the licensing process is done on complete up and up, bringing in outside audit firms and such to make sure that there aren't any concerns, and making sure that there is full support, or at least enough support from the Cook Islands people. And then really around the world, we are seeing more and more support for the Cook Islands, and more importantly, the Cook Islands wants to make the world realize that they are dedicated to this. Of course, they are going to do it with an environmental overlay. They're not going to go in there and sort of, because the ocean is ultimately what has supported their people, but assuming that they can get comfortable with the environmental controls and procedures that we put into place, they ultimately, I believe, will move forward with this from a development perspective and commercial extraction.
Right, perfect. So let's shift gears a little bit and really talk about inflection points and really what is going to help drive the company forward. And so, you guys have done the economic validation, you're nearing the end of the nodule assessment, that we talked about. What's the inflection point, right? It's the harvest. Is it the harvesting license? And what are the next steps in order to get there? And if you move forward 2 slides, I think we have a slide on that.
You got it. So I think, in terms of, for the module license, so we have gotten through the extraction. From here, it's really providing the environmental viability and the harvesting plan, as it says here, but also moving off of that JORC port. So moving the JORC from measured, from indicated to measured, resource is hugely important. At the same time, advancing our environmental plan to get in line to do trial mining will be the next stage. So over the next 12 to 18 months, we will put an application in to do trial mining. Importantly, that trial mining will be done at a level where the extraction will be large enough to be able to have a commercial impact on the market, and really looking to develop and demonstrate to the market that this is truly something that can be done in a very robust manner, and also in an environmentally conscious or responsible manner there as well. So those are really what we're expecting to have accomplished in the next 12 to 18 months.
So I got a question coming in from the audience, and it's actually great timing because it's on CapEx. And so as you kind of move from phase to phase, are there any step ups in CapEx for the business?
Well, there are. Now, I think, when you kind of look at this from an extraction perspective, we do expect that, and remember, we are a minority shareholder, so these aren't things that are going to ultimately fall entirely on us, but we do think the entire development process for this process up until commercial mining will be somewhere in the $45 to $50 million. Of course, Odyssey's already put in its portion of that, so we think that a lot of this burden will fall on other investors. Similarly, though, once you get to commercial, there are different manners to which ultimately that can occur. What we do ultimately expect to see, however, is we do think, some of the deep water drilling companies that have riser ships that are no longer, able to sort of be productive because they have to go deeper and deeper, the ability to convert those riser ships. And we are seeing interest from those companies. All Seas is already working with the metals company, and we do think some of those other riser companies will continue to look. We're also talking to other commercial partners like Boskalis to provide that kind of capital. And ultimately, we do expect them to carry the vast majority of that investment. And of course, they'll have an economic stake in this project as well to carry that CapEx burden.
Okay, thanks. So we're going to shift gears a little bit because you've got a couple things upcoming that we want to make sure the investors are aware of. One in particular is the pending legislation with NAFTA. And so if you'll fast forward a slide, Chris, if you can talk a little bit about where we are with that timing. Go forward one more slide. There you go.
So as you rightfully said, Dan, we have been in this process, in this exploration down in Mexico for quite some time. The license was ultimately withdrawn by the Mexican government a couple of years ago unlawfully. We took it to the Mexican Supreme Court, to which we won twice. After it was taken away a second time by the Mexican government, we took the Mexican government to court in the NAFTA Court of Law, ultimately the World Court. We have gone through the whole litigation process, and we do expect in the next 4 to 6 months or so to, most likely will be, the sweet spot for us to, hear about the outcome. We are very confident that we will win this case. As you rightfully said, we have seen the Mexican Supreme Court weigh positively in our interest, already twice. And so we think directionally it's very optimistic. So to be less aware or to have a less understanding about exactly what our award will be, but we are targeting, something up to $2 billion. And we do think that we have, every reason have done a very good job of ultimately supporting our case to why we should have that. Now, I think it's important to note that we continue to try and work on a commercial solution with the Mexican government. Of course, we need to defend our existing shareholders, so we're not going to certainly do that just for a license. We'll ultimately have to be made whole for all the costs and the expenses that we've incurred up until this point, as well as lost opportunity. But assuming that we can get somewhere there, that could ultimately be another outcome. But we are very optimistic in a positive outcome one way or the other in the NAFTA case.
And so getting into that a little more detail, how do the mechanics of that work? Will Odyssey actually receive the funds? And if so, kind of what does that mean for the company? Do you have any earmarks, for use of the funds right now?
Well, we haven't officially come out and set any earmarks for the funds, but I do think that a very small portion of it ultimately could go to supporting some of these mineral projects there as well. I don't think that we won't be out buying airplanes and boats, I can assure you for that. But I do think that, a small portion of it, I do think, if we were to invest to fund all of our CapEx needs and all of our projects without taking into any other external capital, it would probably be in the $50 to $60 million range. And we don't think that we'd ever do that. So that just gives you, that would be the absolute, I would say somewhat irresponsible, but I don't think we would do that. So I think that would be the cap on the possibilities for us to be able to spend. So I think that gives us some context, but that's kind of where we'd land.
Can you go forward one slide, please? And then obviously there's just some more on NAFTA here. I just want to make sure we showed this before
you got it. So the one on the left is, if we lose NAFTA. Now, importantly on the NAFTA case, if we lose, we do have litigation funding out there that's currently on our balance sheet. It's non-recourse, so to the extent that we do that, that non-recourse debt or litigation funding goes to zero. If we do get an arbitration award, you'll see some economics that the litigation funder would ultimately be able to get there as well. And then, of course, in a settlement, we would have a lower payment as a result of that because it would ultimately move into a commercial settlement.
Okay. So appreciate the overview update. I think a good point to move forward on now is really the value proposition. And so if you want to move forward one slide, where is Odyssey today? Why do you think it's a great investment?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think today that the market doesn't give us any valuation for the CIC project or Cook Islands project, and I think that's largely because we've been very limited in what we've said about that project. Part of that's by design. I think that the very early days in terms of these projects can be a little sensitive, as we've seen some of the NGO activities and really going after the metals company and such. So we try to limit some of our disclosure as a result of that. But I do think that from a reflective basis, if you were to take a very conservative stance on what the value of this, it could be a fairly powerful investment for Odyssey. Then, of course, you'll see the impact of what could happen here from Odyssey's shareholder perspective if we were to have an award. We give a couple scenarios. So even on the low end of the range there, it would be pretty meaningful for Odyssey from a shareholder perspective.
And so as we move forward, over the next couple of months, what are some of the external things that investors can be looking for, right, to help measure your progress?
Well, of course, NAFTA litigation will, of course, be a big one. And so there probably won't be too many updates between now and when that occurs, though it's very difficult to put a timeline on there. There is no standardized process with the NAFTA court. It is what it is. We have been sort of give or take 1 year from when we went into closing arguments, and 1 year would have been as of September of last year. As for the mineral projects, Cook Islands and otherwise, it really is a fairly defined process. So that is advancing the JORC report from indicated to measured, and then taking it from measured and such, and then be able to move along different portions of that project as well. Perhaps more importantly, getting the environmental permits moving forward, getting a feasibility study done. And these are all just sort of table stakes for the mining industry. And that's really where we're focused here on the next 12 months as well. So we would expect to be able to report back about how we're making those advancements going forward.
Okay. I appreciate it. Chris, thank you for the time. Very informative as always. And so we look to have you back on for the next event. For the folks that are still watching, we're going to have our next session coming up at the bottom of the hour. And it's with a private company that's called Don't Quit. So that being said, thank you again for your participation, Chris, and thanks to the audience, and we'll see you next time.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much.